Western parts of England overnight, a few breaks elsewhere, but actually it's another largely cloudy night, and as a result it's another relatively frost-free night for many. 3 or 4 Celsius where we keep the cloud, but where we lose the cloud, temperatures dipping below freezing. So, for example, Western Scotland, Northwest England, a touch of frost to begin things this weekend. That's where the brightest skies will be once again. Even where we've got the cloud, actually, it's going to be relatively bright, and most places will be dry, but there are some showers from the word go across northern Scotland, and showers will increasingly affect eastern parts of England, especially through Yorkshire into Lincolnshire and East Anglia. Temperatures, just as they've been all week, around 7 to 9 Celsius, but feeling quite chilly, I think, on that North Sea coast where we've got showers, where we've got the breeze from the northeast. Into the evening on Saturday, an uptick in the showery activity for northern Scotland, and a few showers elsewhere across some central and western parts of the UK. And you can see the winds are changing direction at this point, so 0 degrees there for Lerwick and 2 to 4 Celsius elsewhere, although where we do get clear spells, once again, a touch of frost as we begin Sunday. But I think Sunday, another largely cloudy day across the UK. A few more showers scattered about, especially northern and western Scotland, western parts of England and Wales. And those showers will drift south. Now, during Monday, as those showers move south, they'll turn sleety. Tuesday, more widely, much colder air.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Dewbs and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewbs, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewbs, and this is Dewbs and Kerr. Have you ever been called far right, Don't you think that term is thrown around too easily, too quickly? Listen to this.
Let's call a spade a spade. Some of those outside are part of the far right.
Well, I've got to be honest, I get called a spade far right frequently. Do you? And this is my question to you tonight. That insult gets thrown around like confetti for absolutely everything, so it seems. You heard it then from the Mayor of London in response to people criticising his ULEZ scheme. I mean, come on now. What does far right even mean anymore? Do you know? I don't. And are minority groups overrepresented on television? Yes or no? And have you seen the drag acts performing for babies? What on earth is that about? Also, there's a labour shortage in this country, as we know, but the answer, what is it? Could it perhaps be to use prisoners? Should we be getting those people out and about? I don't know, perhaps they could be picking crops for us. If you're shouting yes at your television, do you think they should be paid for their efforts as well? Give me your thoughts. But before we get into all of that, let's bring ourselves up to speed, shall we, with tonight's latest headlines.
Hi there, it's Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 6. A very good evening to you. We'll start with Boris Johnson because he may have misled the House of Commons at least 4 times. That is according to MPs investigating his conduct over Partygate. The Commons Privileges Committee says breaches of coronavirus rules in Downing Street would have been obvious to Boris Johnson at the time. The former Prime Minister repeatedly denied that rules were broken at Number 10 when he was asked about that in the Commons. He says it's his belief all guidance had been followed.
The reason there's no evidence to show that I must have known or I must have believed that illegal events were taking place is because I didn't. And I thought we were fighting COVID to the best of our ability in very difficult circumstances in Number 10, in the Cabinet Office, night and day. And I believe that what we were doing was in conformity with the COVID regulation. So that is why I said what I said in Parliament.
Well, Boris Johnson says he would have queried Sue Gray's independence before appointing her to investigate Partygate if he'd known she would join Labour. The senior civil servant who's been appointed Sir Keir Starmer's new chief of staff found widespread rule-breaking had taken place in government buildings, and Mr Johnson was fined by police as a result. Labour say Mr Johnson's using the appointment to vindicate himself after being ousted over a series of scandals. But Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg is calling for a proper inquiry into her appointment. Major ambulance strikes in England and Wales scheduled for next week have been suspended after the government agreed to discuss pay for this year. Tens of thousands of key workers had been due to walk out on Monday and Wednesday next week. The GMB and Unite unions, though, say this marks a huge shift in the government's position. The unions, though, say they will continue discussions with the government, and there's been no decision yet about calling off further strike action. Meanwhile, teachers in Scotland have received a new pay offer. The proposal is offering a 7% rise backdated to April last year, a further 5% from this April, and another 2% from next year. The Educational Institute of Scotland plans 20 days of rolling strikes, targeting every local authority north of the border between March and April. Constance Martin and Mark Gordon have been remanded in custody after the remains of a baby were found on Wednesday. The pair were charged with manslaughter, concealing the birth of a child and perverting the course of justice at Crawley Magistrates Court. The remains of the baby, named in court documents as Victoria, were found in a shed in Brighton following a major search. The pair will appear at the Old Bailey at the end of the month. A reality TV star has been sentenced to 21 months in prison for sharing online a private video of himself having sex with his girlfriend. Stephen Bear was accused of circulating footage of him and Georgia Harrison having sex in his garden in August 2020. Ms Harrison, who has waived her right to anonymity, says she demanded the clip never be shared. Bear, who denied all charges, was found guilty of voyeurism as well as disclosing private films with intent to cause distress. Ms Harrison says she's relieved it's over.
Today's sentence is a vindication of what I've been put through and sends a clear message that the police and the courts take this matter very seriously. I want to let all other victims of this crime know that I stand in solidarity with them and I have absolutely no regrets on waiving my anonymity. I hope that this puts anyone off committing this sort of crime, and I hope for anyone else who's been victim of it, it gives them some sort of justice.
Mourners have lined the streets to pay respects to Leah Croucher, whose body was found in a house in Milton Keynes 4 years after she disappeared. A cortege for the 19-year-old passed through Furston in a public funeral procession. Thames Valley Police found human remains at a property last October following a tip-off from the public. Ms Croucher was last seen walking to work in February 2019. Neil Maxwell was found dead 2 months after her disappearance, and he remains the only suspect in the case. Finally, the King and Queen Consort will make their first state visits to France and Germany at the end of the month. Buckingham Palace says the 6-day trip will celebrate Britain's relationship with both countries, marking shared histories, culture and values. The royal couple will travel to Paris and then on to Berlin. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News, but now it's back to Dewbs and Co.
Thanks for that. Well, I'm Michelle Dewbs and I'm keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got the right and the broadcaster, Paul Embry, and the chair of Oxfordshire Conservatives, William Hall. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening.
Oh, gosh, guys, watching that, the headlines just then, that reality TV story, I don't know, have you followed it? I have to say, I've never watched the show in question, nor do I really know the individuals involved. But I did see the clip tonight of that fella outside the court, I think he was, and it just made me kind of wince inside, and I thought, oh, this is one of the things that's wrong in our society, isn't it? All these people oversharing this stuff. There were girls going up to him, begging him for selfies outside the court. Goodness gracious me. Anyway, you know the drill, don't you, on Dewbs and Co. It's not just about us three here in this studio. It's very much about you guys at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? Get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address as usual. Or you can tweet me if that's your thing at GBNews. Lots for me to get into tonight, but I do want to touch briefly on this Boris Johnson thing. Have you seen that update today? He reckons he's been vindicated, basically, by a report that's out from the Privileges Committee about whether or not he misled lockdown, so-called Partygate. Do you care about this, William?
I think the public have moved on, really. I mean, the whole inquiry now is so completely muddied into a political brawl with Sue Gray joining Labour, the person who was investigating it. I think people just want to get on with their lives. It was a very difficult time for everyone, individuals, the country, everyone. I think it's best that this kind of political game playing moves aside. It's very clear from the report that Boris didn't mislead Parliament.
You would say that, though, wouldn't you? Because you're Tory and it's good for you if it goes away.
Well, no, I'm also an individual who wants to, actually look at the real issues that matter. People are going to be looking at how much it costs to fill up their car. They're going to be looking at Russia's actions in Ukraine. Those are things that actually people are interested in. I do genuinely believe that most people at home will be watching this and thinking, oh, God, are we still going on about that?
Are you saying that at home? Give me your thoughts, Paul Embry. What says you?
I have quite a bit of sympathy with what Will says. I think people's priorities across the country probably are elsewhere at the moment. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis where people are struggling to pay their mortgages and energy bills and so on. I suspect a lot of them probably think this is old hat. Why are we still talking about this? However, equally, you can't have a Prime Minister who misleads Parliament. And if a Prime Minister has potentially misled Parliament... and
what about if it's accidentally misled them?
Well, you can't mislead Parliament one way or the other. If you've done it accidentally, you still need to go back and apologise. If it's been done deliberately and, the evidence will be what the evidence will be, and we'll see that in due course, then that strikes me as a serious offence and, there would need to be some sort of sanction there. But by and large, I suspect many people across the country are looking at this now as a bit of a distraction and thinking there are more important things in our lives and we want government to focus on those and Parliament to focus on those.
Indeed. So let's focus on something else then, shall we? Give me your thoughts about that Johnson thing. Are you bothered? If so, how bothered? Give me your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.uk is how you reach me. Let me ask you this. Have you been called far-right recently? Because let's face it, if you disagree with a variety of things these days, which normally would be quite sensible a few years ago to disagree with them, these days, oh no. You are apparently some kind of Nazi in disguise, far-right, you name it. Let's have a look at this most recent example of what I am talking about.
What I find unacceptable, though, is some of those who've got legitimate objections joining hands with some of those outside who are part of a far-right group who are... Some of those outside... Some of those, let's be frank, let's call a spade a spade. Some of those outside are part of the far right. Some are COVID deniers. Some are vaccine deniers. And some are Tories.
I mean, absolutely ridiculous. In case you was not watching, you was wondering what was going on, that was Sadiq Khan. He was speaking there at so-called People's Question Time. The issue in hand was around ULEZ, you know, the kind of emissions thing, clean air and all the rest of it. The response that he got then, Paul Embry, from people in the audience was quite reflective of the sentiment from a lot of people, I think, because this whole tendency to kind of, if you disagree with ULEZ, for example, or anything, or lockdowns, whatever, you're immediately described as far right. And to me, it's used as a tool just to silence people, almost embarrass people, shame people, make people think, oh gosh, well, I better not question or query that. What do you think to it?
I think it's been stripped, frankly, of all historical meaning. Once upon a time, we knew and understood what far right meant. It meant the National Front, it meant the British National Party, it meant people in bomber jackets and Doc Martin boots and skinheads marching through often areas with high numbers of ethnic minorities and trying to intimidate people. It meant violence, it meant some sort of affinity for the Third Reich and Hitler and so on. And that was people's general understanding of what far right meant. Nowadays, people use it in terms of abuse against people who, for example, voted for Brexit, or people in America who voted for Donald Trump, or people who fly the St George's flag from their house, or people who believe that, you know, biological sex is immutable and men can't become women. And these people are being labelled by a tiny minority of people who are trying to capture our language. They're being labelled as far right and they're being labelled as fascists and so on. And I think what it's about is about demonising anybody who doesn't hold, if you like, liberal views, the kind of radical progressive views that seems to infect much of our elites, our political and cultural elites. Anybody who doesn't hold those views is demonised as being on the far right. Any kind of small c conservative view is deemed as being extreme. That's what we do. We present it as far right. We say it's not mainstream, it's not orthodox. And I think we have to push back against it, actually, because this kind of language is being promoted by what is ultimately a tiny, albeit vocal, but a tiny minority. We shouldn't allow them to capture the language. We shouldn't allow this sort of word inflation. We shouldn't allow them to reinvent the term far right and to wrench it from its historical meaning. And we need to challenge them.
Philip says to him, far right means that you're blessed with more than average common sense. That's one interpretation.
I don't know about that.
William, what says you?
Well, I mean, the mayor obviously was either misspeaking, he didn't know what he was saying, or he was intentionally trying to dismiss valid concerns of people he is meant to represent by labelling them something which is basically offensive on a policy that has nothing to do with any kind of far-right issue. When I was at university, a bunch of students got together and protested outside a Remembrance Sunday parade because they said it was far-right to stand for a moment's silence to remember fallen soldiers who have protected our country. This is absolutely about trying to stop people from saying genuinely sensible things in public discourse and say that if I don't agree with you, you must somehow be evil. That is bad for our public discourse. It's not worthy of an elected representative either.
Look at what happened when Sir Keir Starmer, when he became the leader of the Labour Party, started to give press conferences and statements in front of the Union flag. Now, I'm in the Labour Party, I'm a member of the wider Labour movement. There were elements of the left and people inside the Labour Party who attacked Keir Starmer simply for standing in front of the national flag and giving a speech and said that he is pandering to the far right. You only have to go on social media to see some of these comments. So this is how the axis has shifted on this particular terminology. The idea that someone who's aspiring to be the Prime Minister of the country simply standing in front of the national flag when giving a statement is demonised by elements of his own party as being pandering to the far right, I think is absolutely ridiculous.
And just to be clear, by the way, he didn't misspeak. He doubled down on it. So when he made his first, like, little, far right outside and people were heckling him, he waited for the pause, and then the clip I've just played was obviously the second response to that, so he doubled down on it. And he's issued a statement as well, and he says the Mayor stands by his decision to call out the vile messages on display. He's talking about Nazi symbols, spreading vaccine conspiracy theory. I mean, really? How many people were stood outside of that People's Question Time displaying Nazi symbols? I mean,
it's guilt, it's guilt by association, isn't it? What he said is the legitimate people who were opposing the low emission zone scheme. He said you're in coalition with the far right. Now that suggests, by saying you're in coalition, it suggests that you have voluntarily entered into some sort of alliance with these people, rather than them just kind of hanging on to your cause. I think the problem is when you use that argument, by saying that because you happen to be on the same side as someone in a particular cause, that you therefore must be supporting them. Where does that end? For example, the British National Party opposed the Iraq War in 2003. Millions of ordinary decent people in this country opposed the Iraq War in 2003. Does that mean that they were in coalition with the BNP on that issue? Of course it doesn't mean that.
But this is just very much, isn't it? Tell me if you think I'm wrong, William, that it's all about suppressing people's thought process, because you know, a lot of people, I mean, to be honest, you know, this channel, for example, will get called hard right, far right. I will get called far right. And it just loses its kind of impact, really. But if you're an average Joe that's not kind of, I don't know, you just might say, oh, I don't agree with having to pay an extra £12.50 to go to town. And then someone turns around to you and goes, Nazi!
Yeah.
You know, if you're an average Joe, you're going to go, okay. And then that's it then. You're quashed, you won't criticise that comment again. Is it that that's driving this, do you think, or is there something more to it?
Well, I think he's probably also trying to play a political game, which is that if he says something inflammatory like that, he doesn't have to debate the actual policy. So to a certain extent, it's a little bit of the political tactics. But when he dismisses the valid concerns of people he's meant to represent, he is being a level of arrogance that I think is pretty appalling for a politician. I mean, you're exactly right. He's basically saying, no, we can't have that debate, we can't have that discussion. Your views are not worthy of being aired, your views are not worthy of me hearing them. He's the mayor, he's not a dictator, and he needs to get used to that.
It reminds me of a criticism. I don't know if anyone knows who the commentator Owen Jones is. He posted something on Twitter, and I've got to be honest, it made me laugh. He posted it when I was on holiday, actually, a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, you know, here's the truth, GB News is hard right. And then he was comparing us to what he called Novara Media, which is what he called set up by intellectual, left-leaning people. And I sat there and I thought, you absolute pillar. Not least because the founder of Novara Media is a regular on the show. In fact, actually, he was on last night. A very decent chap he is too. It's just absolute nonsense. And it's not just far right and all these labels, by the way. It won't have escaped your notice that, for example, if you dare to have the audacity to stand up for people that have been harmed by the vaccine, you get called an anti-vaxxer. And I sit there and I think, are you a bit daft? Because by very definition, the people that have been experienced side effects from the vaccine, they've literally taken the vaccine, so how can they be an anti-vaxxer? Come on.
It shows an utter contempt by some of these people, some of these political elites and cultural elites, who most of whom kind of reside in London, so they see the rest of the country from a very London-centric viewpoint. They don't really understand the world outside the M25. They don't understand provincial Britain, small-town Britain, and they just assume that actually these places are infested with people with reactionary, hard-right views. Now, I think the truth is actually that the social and cultural norms in this country are changing at such a rapid rate that it's allowing them to get away with labelling what just a few years ago were perfectly mainstream and acceptable views as being far right. And it shows, I think, an elite that really doesn't understand the world beyond their own metropolis.
One of my viewers, Glenn, has just been in touch. He says, Michelle, I am a gay man, and there was once a time when being a bigot or far right was basically meant as you were an enemy to the gay community. Suddenly, says Glenn, it would appear that just because I don't support Sadiq Khan or his policies, or, for example, drag queens entertaining young children, that Glenn says that he feels like he's suddenly become both of the above. He says, I don't care what other people think, but you couldn't make all of this up, could you? By the way, that drag queen story, I'll be touching on that before the end of the show. Have you seen it? grown men in thongs and bondage get up, gyrating to babies. Honestly, I promise you, I think this world has gone mad sometimes, so I do, and we'll touch on that before the end of the show. But I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'll have some of your thoughts. And also, I want you to ponder this during the break and tell me what you think. We've got a labour shortage, haven't we, in this country? Is the answer this? Prisoners, get them out, get them working. For example, picking crops. What do you make to that? Give me your thoughts and I'll see you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewbs, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in my big opinion, the lockdown files prove what we always feared. The COVID response was about politics, not science, and the powers that be were laughing at us throughout. As top bureaucrat Sue Gray joins the Labour Party as their chief of staff, proof if you needed it that our civil service is not impartial. My Mark Meets guest is the woman who is destined to become the boss of fashion giant Levi's before she gave it all up to take on the woke mob. Plus my panel and tomorrow's papers. We're live from 8.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewbs and I'm keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. And by the way, if you're sitting there thinking, shall I watch Dewbs or shall I go to the pub? Guess what? You can do both because we are on your radio as well, in case you've not enjoyed us that way. DAB+, that's how you can listen to us. So if you're waiting to go out and about on this Friday night, you can take me with you. What a treat. And I'll tell you who else you can take with you as well, the writer and broadcaster Paul Embry and the chair of Oxfordshire Conservatives, William Hall. Good evening to everybody. Let me just look at what you guys have been saying, because we were just talking about being called far right. It's those on the left who use it all the time to describe people who don't agree with their ideology, says Angela. Completely agree. Alan says it seems that anyone who is left of centre accuses anyone who disagrees with them as being of the far right. By the way, I think you'd say you're left of centre. You don't use that kind of slur, do you? So I don't think it's everyone.
No, it's often used against me, if anything.
What's used against you?
Well, the term far... I mean, I wrote a book 2 years ago, which some colleagues, I use the term loosely, on the left immediately dismissed as a far-right tract before it was even published, before they'd even read it, because it kind of espoused those old Labour, old-school values, the sort of values that once upon a time the Labour Party welcomed, the sort of views that still resonate very much in provincial Britain and England beyond the fashionable cities and university towns. But that gets dismissed as far right now by these people who themselves are cranks.
Judith says, can I say how refreshing your debate is tonight? Michelle, loving your panel, and your Van Gogh lookalike is playing a blinder this evening with common sense, blunt speaking and sticking up for your normal average person. I think she means you there, Paul.
I think she might do, yeah.
Right, let's move on, shall we? Because unless you've had your head in the sand for goodness knows how long, you might have noticed we've got some staff shortages pretty much everywhere, quite frankly. Now, there's been some solutions as to how we fix it. Don't worry, it's not returning back into the EU, so you can breathe easy. Instead, it's to look to places like prisons and get those guys out and about, particularly in places like the fields, for example, get them picking fruit. William, is that the answer to our shortages of staff in this country? Get the prisoners to do it?
Well, I think there are probably some underlying problems we sort first by getting the immigration system sorted so that people can come to this country if they're going to do a decent job.
Yeah, but that's going to take a long time. I'm talking about a here and now.
Yeah, and for the few thousand prisoners in open prisons who we can rely upon to conduct themselves safely and fairly, then that's probably not a bad idea as long as they're employed in a reasonable way and it's not, forced labour for nothing. But I think I would be very, very reticent to start having people who are serving longer-term sentences go out into the community and undertake work. Because actually, for me, prison isn't a holiday camp. It's to remove dangerous people from the streets and society and keep us safe. And I have to say, sometimes the rehabilitation movement goes an awfully long way too far, in my view. So if someone is not a threat to society, then fine. But if they're in for a long time, which is what some people advocate, then I don't want them anywhere near families and people living out in the community.
So subject to a risk assessment, you wouldn't be opposed to it. And you think that these people should be paid?
God, no, I wouldn't dream of enforcing a risk assessment on anyone, let alone a prisoner. But I think people who are in open prisons are already categorised as reasonably safe. But if they are going to work, then they should be paid a fair wage, because...
What's a fair wage?
Well, I think it'd be reasonable for them to be employed on the same terms as anyone else in society. I mean, if you are going to try and bring them into the community by giving them a job, then it's only fair that they get a reasonable idea. There is a number of restaurants who employ prisoners to produce food and to learn a trade and a skill. Now, I'm all for that, but I would first of all like our education system to be good enough to give people who aren't prisoners those life chances as well. And I very much worry that a few thousand people are getting a better set of life chances than most people out working in a normal way.
So they should get normal wage, i.e. minimum wage and above and all the rest of it. What about the fact that they get their board and lodgings paid for?
Well, perhaps we can find... Yeah, I think so. That's a good idea.
Oh, good. Thank you. Paul, your thoughts?
I think potentially it's a good way of reintegrating people into society, giving them, the work ethic, the skills that will be necessary to them when they're eventually released. I agree they should be paid for it. If you're going to have a situation where private companies are going to use the advantage of prison labour, and that could mean, by the way, private companies setting up workshops within the prison space itself, rather than rather than prisoners always going beyond the walls of the prison. But if private companies are going to get the benefit of that labour, then absolutely the prisoners should be paid. I think they should be given workers' rights in the way that anybody else would be. Pay tax, pay national insurance, pay pension contributions and all the rest of it. And you never know, some of them might then, when they're released, stay in that job, have the opportunity of continuing in that job once they're actually released. What you can't have is a situation, I think, where private companies exploit that labour. Because not only would it be unfair rather, on the individuals themselves.
Exploit it how?
Well, by not paying them, for example, and just saying, look, we want your labour, but we're not going to pay you, or we're not going to pay you a decent rate, because not only would that be unfair on the individuals themselves.
What about if you make a contribution to the institution of the prison as opposed to the individuals?
Well, look, I mean, it needs to be fair. Whatever the solution is, it needs to be a fair one for the individual. I think we need to stand against the principle that you know, private companies can set up inside prisons and exploit cheap labour, essentially, and not pay people any wages. Because not only would it be unfair to those individuals, but it would also give those private companies the opportunity to hold down wages for their normal employees, for their non-prison employees. If you suddenly have as an employer, a much greater, let's say, a reserve army of labour available to you, and you're not paying anything for that, or you're only paying a pittance for it, then it allows you to hold down wages for your normal employees, because whenever wage demands come in, you just say, well, why should I give you that? Because I've got all these people who are prepared to pay.
Well, you've read the mind of one of my viewers, Ivor, because literally the second that you said it, he was emailing in as well saying, what about setting up factories within prisons, Michelle? That would give us an economic output, but it would also, to your point, keep people safe. Win-win, says Ivor. Andy said, yes, we should get prisoners to go to work, and they could start by repairing all the potholes in Britain's roads. Someone wrote in about potholes just yesterday and asked me to do an entire debate on them, for that matter. Sally says, I think it's a great idea for prisoners to be used for labour, especially for picking crops, but they should not be paid for it. It costs the taxpayer a fortune to keep them inside, so this would be their way at basically paying the cost back to the country.
The punishment for the prisoner is having your liberty taken away. That is the punishment. You don't have your freedom, you don't have your liberty. It would be an extra punishment, in my view, to say, oh, by the way, you're going to work a 42-hour week and we're not going to pay you for it. You're going to be doing manual labour, we're not going to pay you. I think that would be an addition.
Too far.
It'd be an addition to the sentencing that prisoner received in a court of law from a judge. So, you know, if you're going to ask them to work, then you've got to pay them.
Your viewer makes an excellent point. What I say people should be paid to work like a normal job, when it comes to giving back to the community that they have violated through their criminality, I'm all for having people be required to do things like paint over graffiti or fill in potholes. That absolutely should be happening. There's no reason why, if someone gets a custodial sentence, they shouldn't also be given mandatory community volunteering work to do. So if they're in an open prison, I'm all for using them to sort out the bits and bobs that need doing in the local community in a safe way. And I don't think they should be paid a penny for that, because if they have gone and violated the community's ability to feel safe, then they should make recompense for that. But when it comes to actual work, i.e. competing with the people out in the world, then fair enough, we need to do the things that Paul's talking about.
I think there's a lot of advantages to this, isn't there? I mean, not least the obvious one to the economy, but also, to your point, to the individuals, because at the end of the day, you know, if someone is a wrong 'un and they're in prison for whatever it is that they've done, you want to try and break that cycle, don't you? So they don't just come out within 5 seconds to do something wrong again and get back in. So if you can break it,
and I think we're pretty rubbish at it at the moment. Actually, when you look at prisoners, most of them, you know, don't work. I think work is quite sporadic in prisons. People are generally paid a pittance. There doesn't seem to be much of a work ethic because of that, because there isn't any reward in labour given to them. But if you actually give them a proper job, as I say, pay tax, national insurance, you give them that work ethic, it would be a really favourable way of reintegrating.
You're focusing a lot on the rights of the prisoner. What about the rights of the victim?
Yes.
Prison is not just there to give people chances when they get out. It's also there to punish and to keep communities safe. So I would like to see more of a focus on people having to have the time sat in a cell thinking about what they've done, thinking about the harm they've caused. And I'm very concerned when we come into these kinds of debates, people spend an awful lot of time thinking about what the prisoner's going to do when they leave, not what the victim's going through whilst that person's
No,
in jail.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm certainly not someone, I'm not a liberal when it comes to prison policy, I can assure you of that. But at the same time, I think it's reasonable to say, look, if you can find a way of reintegrating people back into society by giving them rewarding work, and it's not as if you know you're giving them some sort of huge bonus. You're giving them pay, yes, but they've got to work for it, as they will do when they're released. I don't think those two positions are incompatible. Tough prison policy, but give people opportunities for when they come out.
Elizabeth says, Michelle, going to work on a fruit farm is slave labour. You see, I find this attitude very interesting, Elizabeth, because it wasn't that long ago when actually it was Brits that used to do fruit picking. I remember my siblings getting picked up in a minibus at the corner of the street and off they went to the fields, and it was just what you did in your school holidays and all the rest of it. But then the attitude to that job, I find really interesting. It's almost like people think it is beneath us these days. I would pick fruit if I literally had no other way of paying my bills, would you? Or would you think it's beneath you? Andrew says, Michelle, stick all the prisoners into Parliament. Couldn't be any worse, could it? I'll leave you to ponder that and answer that for yourself. Right, I will take a quick break. When I come back, I'm pondering this. Do you think minority groups are overrepresented on TV? A survey that has been conducted by YouGov says that half of people in society feels that yes, they are. Are you one of them? Give me your thoughts and I'll see you in 2. I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. Alongside me, I've got the writer and broadcaster Paul Embry and the chair of the Oxfordshire Conservatives, William Hall. Good evening, gents, and welcome back to all of you guys. Brian says, as an ex-governor of HMP, please can I remind you that this whole thing about prisoners working is nothing new. Prisons like Latchmere House and others were resettlement prisons, but most have been stopped now. Interesting insight there. Brian, by the way, do get back in touch with me. What do you think to the notion that prisons, I personally think they're too soft these days. They focus too much on the enjoyment and comfort of prisoners as opposed to the punishment, which is what I think should be the primary reason that you're in there. What do you think to that? One of my viewers has just been in touch saying, please, can you thank the chap that's just raised victims? They're saying that they feel that the victims are almost always overlooked when it comes to talking about crime and punishment and all the rest of it. So thank you to you from that viewer. Now, another day and another survey. But get this one right. This is a YouGov poll, basically. And what it is, it's saying about half of us believe, half of Brits that is, believe that ethnic minorities and LGBT communities are overrepresented on TV. Right, let's just cut to the chase and waffle around it for ages, but let's just get to the point. Do you agree with that? And if so, is it a problem, Paul?
I do agree, because I think it's blatantly obvious to anybody who watches TV that there is an over-representation of people from minority backgrounds. And I get the sense that people in this country feel that watching TV dramas and adverts and whatever is becoming a bit of a moral lecture, almost like a relentless moral lecture. I think that the people responsible, TV executives, advertising executives, seem to think that the whole country is like Islington, and it isn't like Islington. And I think partly it's because of virtue signalling as well. They want to sort of flaunt their progressive credentials, these TV companies and advertisers and so on. But what they end up doing is ultimately creating what is a bogus reality, and what is a reality that simply does not resonate with large parts of Britain. And we can all be in favour of fair representation, and I'm absolutely in favour of fair representation, but it's gone well beyond that. What we've got is a kind of politically motivated hyper-diversity, where I think TV producers are almost petrified now of having, you know, just three or four white faces all in the same scene together without a person of colour being there as well. And as I say, when you think that there are large parts of this country that are not particularly touched by multiculturalism, they probably look at this stuff and think, look, why are you just imposing this upon me? Why are you just promoting this sort of hyper-diverse agenda the whole time? It doesn't resonate with me, and it's become a bit of a lecture.
And I'm going to come back to you on that in a sec, but William, your thoughts?
I mean, Paul's conflated three totally separate things. The representation of people from ethnic minorities on television, the representation of people's political views on television, and the diversity of Islington. I have to say, I disagree on two of those. I think that broadcasters want the same argument.
Let him give his point.
Broadcasters want to reflect the country that they are trying to serve, and when it comes to representation of people from ethnic minorities, and that is a really good thing. Where I do totally agree is that, you know, through Brexit, through all these issues, the mainstream media has, of course, had a complete inherent bias towards metropolitan areas. I'm from basically a rural community out in the countryside. For me, watching TV, watching the BBC, it's been like a different planet. But I cannot agree that it is somehow intertwined, the political bias, with the background of the person on the television.
Really?
Yeah, no, I can. The editorial decisions are made by people up in the gallery. They're not made by the person talking on the show. And those editorial decisions have predominantly been made by the kind of institutional lifers in the media who have been staffing organisations like the BBC for decades. That's where the problem lies, not in the fact that there's an overrepresentation or whatever you want to say of people from ethnic minorities on television. I think conflating those two things is quite dangerous, because it means that we don't see the real problem, which is that people who live in cities have a very limited understanding, by and large, of what life is like for most people out in the small towns like I come from.
I'm not sure we disagree, actually. I mean, I'm not sure I understood your point about the conflation between the political and the decision makers. I mean, the truth is, I think they are intertwined. I think if you have people who are insistent in the higher echelons of TV and advertising, who are insistent the whole time on virtue signalling, on flaunting their progressive credentials, then they will make decisions that actually are in keeping with their own particular bias and their own particular
What does flaunting
worldview.
progressive virtue, what does that look like? Tell me what
Well, exactly what I said at the beginning, which is constantly depicting the UK as a whole as if it were Islington. I mean, most adverts these days and most TV dramas look as though they're actually set in Islington when you look at the demographic of the people. I mean, for example, there was a remake last year by ITV of The Larkins, which was a spin-off of The Darling Buds of May, which was set in 1950s rural Kent. And when you look at the cast list, it could have been any inner London borough. Now, I repeat, I stress
What do
before
you mean
people
by that when you say in a London borough? Do you mean that the demographics, the ethnicities of the people?
Yeah, and it just insults people's intelligence. As I said, I'm absolutely in favour of fair representation on TV.
You don't mind me saying, by the way, you're in a mixed-race marriage as well, aren't you?
That's right.
So you don't mind me saying that? Because many people will be writing into this as well, because it's, for example, when you watch an advert, let's just say it's a breakfast cereal advert, you can bet your bottom dollar that the family advertising that product will be a mixed-race family. Absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Yeah. But when you see every single advert, the family that is in there will be a mixed-race family. And then the sense that people are giving on this survey and in my inbox as well is no problem with that, but it's not representative of the demographics.
And that's the key point. I mean, and let's not forget, by the way, if you went back 20 or 30 years, the opposite was true. Actually, people of colour, people from minority groups were underrepresented on TV and in TV commercials and so on. And it was absolutely right and proper that that got addressed because people, actors, whatever, were not getting their fair shot at it. And the view that people saw from their television sets was not reflective of Britain when they were underrepresented. But now the pendulum has gone so far the other way that, as you said, you can look at any advert now, you look at any TV drama, and it doesn't really reflect the reality of Britain. It insults people's intelligence, and I think it shows really how the elites are just removed from ordinary people across provincial Britain and small-town Britain.
Indeed. Well, it was Anthony's comment I was alluding to there. He's just got in touch, and what he's saying is, Michelle, it is. You just look at the adverts, virtually every single one that involves a family. It is mainly always a mixed race couple. What happened to true reflective representation? Keep your thoughts coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. When we come back, it's Friday, so I just want to look at a couple of bits that, quite frankly, are utterly bizarre. Drag acts for babies, for example, is just one of those things, and there are others. Don't go anywhere, and I'll see you in 2.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewbs, keeping you company until 7 o'clock. If you're desperate to go out, take us with you on the radio. You can listen to me, Paul Embry, who is the writer and broadcaster, and the chair of Oxfordshire Conservatives, William Hall. Welcome back, everybody. Well, it's that time of the night. We have a cheeky little drink. Cheers to your Friday evening. Evidently, I cannot be trusted. With glass. I've got a plastic glass. I should probably, just in case one of you to infuriate me with your views and
go straight to your head, apparently, doesn't
lob it. Yeah, I wouldn't do that, of course. I'm a sensible individual. Right. Let's get into a couple of bits, shall we, that are symbols, if you ask me, of the world gone mad. Have you seen in the press this week the following? I'm going to put imagery up on the TV if you're watching. If you're listening, I'll just describe it to you now. It is a grown man wearing leather thigh-high boots and a bondage outfit, swinging around on a harness, teamed with another guy in a thong, doing the splits and general gyrating, all for an audience not of adults on a Friday night in a nightclub. No, my friends, it is for babies. Yes, you heard me. What is going on? Is this acceptable baby entertainment, William?
No, something's clearly gone very, very wrong here. I mean, it doesn't matter whatever the gender of the person doing this. It's a weird, creepy sexualization of childhood, and it's like the companies that are advertising to kids as well and using kind of sexual imagery. It's bizarre. I don't understand why we started letting this kind of thing go without being challenged, and it's because it goes back to your point earlier. If we this evening say that is an unacceptable thing to do to a child, we will be accused of being ourselves bigots, despite the fact this is so clearly wrong.
A Sherlock actress, I've got to say I've never seen an episode of Sherlock in my life, but Amanda Abington, she called this out on Twitter, and she has received a barrage of abuse saying that she is a transphobe and all the rest of it. I would say she's just quite a sensible individual, quite frankly. Paul, what do you make to it?
I tend to agree with William. I mean, what strikes me, Michelle, is actually there are things that are happening in today's society and things that parents are allowing their kids to be exposed to, which 15, 20 years ago would probably have warranted a knock on the door from social services. Rightly. Yeah. But now it's seen as just, a bit of fun or progressive or enlightened. And actually, I find it really deeply disturbing. I mean, even if you were to say that, as a father, I've got a daughter and I would not like someone who's a biological man, regardless of how he identified, to be in a women's only toilet. I mean, that seems to me a perfectly normal and natural thing for a father to say. And 10, 15 years ago 5 years ago would have been entirely uncontroversial. But say that now, and as you said, William, you invite accusations of bigotry and all sorts of phobias. And it's disturbing. And the truth is, actually, there are not enough people who are brave enough to push back against this stuff publicly. We should see politicians speaking out. We should see media commentators speaking out. But they don't, because they're petrified of being called nasty names on Twitter.
And it is.
And
it's the group, the company involved, Kabba Baba Rave, I'm not sure if I pronounced that properly, they're saying they've turned their profile on social media private because they've been subject to a horrific trolling attack. They're saying that the trolls specifically have a problem with drag artists and non-binary performers performing for children. They're saying that their show was for a baby and not for older children. What I can't get my head around in all of this is, as a grown man, why do you want to spend your spare time sexually gyrating in front of a child of any age? And then, with a straight face, tell me that that is entertainment. There is this gradual creep, as one of you just alluded to. You see the fashion houses. You've seen Balenciaga and Gucci in trouble in recent times. They're putting teddy bears in bondage gear. They're having paperwork relating to paedophilia or whatever it was, something like that in the background. You had Harry Styles propped up against a toddler mattress. It's weird, quite frankly.
What I find as well, though, Michelle, is there's a real paradox, because as a society now, we are so kind of health and safety conscious when it comes to kids. We put them in masks, we don't let them climb trees, all of this sort of thing. And yet we expose them to this. So we go mad for health and safety on the one hand, but expose them to all of this kind of unseemly stuff on the other. And I think it's completely contradictory.
Yeah, it's very peculiar. If you are someone, by the way, that does take your baby to these kind of things and thinks it's fantastic, do get in touch and tell me why. I'm fascinated into your insight. Anyway, moving on. A secondary school. This is a fascinating story, really interesting. A school, long story short, because look at the time, it flies when you're having fun. They've taken the mirrors down in the girls' toilets and instead they've stuck up these kind of posters giving motivational quotes instead, saying basically don't wear makeup, all the rest of it. It goes on. But your thoughts on it, William?
I think, you know, there's a head teacher there who's not focusing on the learning and the education of their kids, but focusing on some bizarre political agenda instead. You know, there is such a thing as right and wrong, and clearly with the discussion we've had about the other thing, then this is an example of that.
Right, you've got 10 seconds, quick.
School should be for teaching, not for preaching, in my view.
Teaching, not preaching. Well, amen to that, everybody, isn't it? Dear girls, makeup is a harmful drug. Once you start using it, you'll feel ugly without it. That was one of the messages. I completely agree with it. Why do so many kids want to wear so much makeup in the first place? Probably because they've been brought up on a stable diet of all this overly sexualised stuff in the first place. It can only head one way, and that is for trouble, if you ask me. Look at the time. It flies when you're having fun, and what fun I have had. William, Paul, thank you for your time, your company.
Thank you.
Thank you at home for yours. Have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you on Monday.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in my big opinion, the lockdown files prove what we always feared. The COVID response was about politics, not science, and the powers that be were laughing at us throughout. As top bureaucrat Sue Gray joins the Labour Party as their chief of staff, proof if you needed it that our civil service is not impartial. My Mark Meets guest is the woman who is destined to become the boss of fashion giant Levi's before she gave it all up to take on the woke mob. Plus my panel and tomorrow's papers. We're live from 8.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know